So we had a post. There was drama. We had a Jeff Alberts who suggested that perhaps your 1RM doesn't matter that much as a bodybuilder. There were Jimmys. They got rustled. There was people who struggled, and this is something that I totally would have struggled with. God, I would say circa 2011, even that late. Which is, I know, may not seem late if you don't know that I existed before that time, but I did.
Eric's actually 9 years old, everybody.
Correct.
10 years old.
I'm the most mature 9-year-old you ever met, in some ways. So, yeah, I mean, so let me ask you this, Andrea, because I know you came to 3DMJ after it existed. Did we come across at the time you came along as the bodybuilding group that was saying, hey, guess what? There's a lot to learn from powerlifters and that strength is important?
This is true, but I don't say but, and is what I meant to say. And I also misinterpreted that as if I don't see numbers go up, I suck at bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. So I don't have Jimmys, but they would have been rustled if I had them. Right.
Your Gymettes.
I don't. I'm not even going to try to come up with something. But yeah, like it was refreshing to hear strength is important and it's measurable. And I think especially because nobody's physique looks different as fast as we'd like for it to look different. So it was like, oh, so like I think the way it was framed was if I'm getting stronger, then my body's changing just so underneath the little skins and fats that I had.
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons why this is the reaction was what it was and why an episode like this is important. Berto, you and I have been, man, I would say maybe less of late because you've come to and just accept the fact that you're a really good bodybuilder and you like to get stronger. I think there was a time when you and I were probably much more both equally invested in the act of getting bigger and stronger. Like I remember us doing meets in 2008 and we were like, this is freaking awesome. This is I don't know who's my wife and who's my mistress. I love both these things.
How rude.
That's not an endorsement of cheating on your wife, by the way. That's an analogy, just to be clear.
Hey, but life was good at the time. Let's not lie about that.
Yeah, we didn't know that there were there was going to be a time point when a 900 kilo, freaking 2,000 pound total would happen. Just one weight class above us by drug free people. So we thought we were decent. We thought we were at the beginning. We didn't think we'd plateau or get injured. And I remember us both saying things like, in fact, you said this to me, and I remember it stuck with me. I noticed the times when my physique improved the most was also when my lifts were concurrently going up. So I don't know what you think about that.
I think to this day, it still is that way. I definitely didn't understand. It's funny. I thought I understood like very clearly, but intuitively, like there were some gaps that were missing. And like now that we know more, I'm like, oh, that makes sense as to why that was happening, But nevertheless, like, yeah, when like performance was increasing, say on like my dumbbell press, like I'm like, oh my God, this is like thicker up here. And it's like, holy crap, that's the hot streak leaving. It's dense there. So yeah, and again, like any phase, like for sure early on, but even now, like after that hot streak with my squats this past off season, I remember looking at my quads and I'm like, holy crap, like they can still improve. So yeah, still holds true, but just nothing happens quite as fast, but strength does. So I do still look at that as a symptom that things are going pretty good.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's an easy thing people to get twisted because normally, like when we have these podcast discussions, I like to build the history, the story, how did we get here, and here's where we are. But I think this is an important one where we just state up front kind of the conclusion, and then we speak to the nuance because there is actually a lot of confusion, even in the academic community, as to the relationship between strength and hypertrophy. and what that looks like, what it means, how much they're related, what causes what, etc. So to spoil the plot, to get to kind of the conclusion, like a good article with the key points and then the reprisal of what they are at the end, there is a big difference between getting stronger and your maximum strength. And getting stronger is not narrowly defined as what is your 1RMs on the big three to meet conditions. Strength does not equal powerlifting. Powerlifting is a sport in which strength is expressed through 1RMs on these three movements in an organized fashion. But getting stronger could mean doing 11 reps instead of 10 on a 20-pound lateral raise over time. So I think what Jeff was not saying in his quote about how 1RMs are not important, what he was not saying is that you shouldn't be trying to improve your performance over time as a bodybuilder. What he was saying is that the 1RM metric of performance is not that useful for a bodybuilder.
Why you got to make so much sense, Eric?
That's what I do.
Well, I think, yes, that spoils the whole thing, but it also should open up so, like it should be relieving to a lot of people, you know?
It also puts forth a lot of questions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if someone was thinking, oh, bodybuilding, hypertrophy, strength, powerlifting. Oh, strength is important for hypertrophy. Sweet. I'm going to do some powerlifting and I'm going to test my 1RMs. And then I go, no, that's not how it works. And they go, well, okay, well, how do I test my strength? Do I have to train to failure? Do I have to do the big three? Why is strength related? So I think when you break down a false idol, now all of a sudden the people need new gods to pray to. And that's what we're going to provide you. We're going to provide you a pantheon of answers now that we have removed the assumptive thing you might have had. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's also confusing because there's hella powerlifters that you look at them and you're like, oh, damn, you know? And then there's a lot of bodybuilders that are also jacked that lift a lot. And you're like, oh, damn, like I should. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to say that you don't need it. But it's great to have someone like Jeff say that, because I don't know how often he hits every, 5-10 years, he hits a new 1RM and something. And he's one of the best in the world. And then, man, there's some kids on the platform their first 5 years where you're like, and you could do figure if you lost 5 pounds. Sweet. Absolutely.
And it's important to remember that they're getting there from the training they did to get stronger, not necessarily the fact that their muscles can produce a lot of force. You know?
Yeah, and it's also deceiving that like you just might not get there. So, which is
absolutely. I think the way I used to present it, man, I'm remembering all the way back to our I'm remembering a specific conference we had in Sacramento. Man, it might have been 2010 or 11. I think Robbie Sardinia might have posed for us or something like that. And I was presenting on strength in general and its relationship to bodybuilding. And I had a picture of Martin Daniels and a picture of Doug Miller as just basically like blow your mind natural bodybuilders. And I said, yeah, these guys are huge and strength is important. Martin Daniels has squatted 500 pounds and that's really, really good. But he's not a champion powerlifter. And Doug Miller, he's really, really freaking strong. You know, he's done 585 for a few reps, but he's not a champion powerlifter. What is really important is that back in the day, Martin Daniels was not squatting 500 pounds for reps or 400 pounds for reps. And Doug Miller was doing less reps with 405 or less reps with 495 or less reps with 585. And now they can do more. So it's almost like, yes, strength is important, but the only metric is how strong are you compared to yourself previously. And if you are no longer able to progress in terms of some objective measurement in any rep range, arguably, then you may not be progressing. So strength is actually, it's a tough thing to hear Jeff Albert say your 1RM doesn't matter. And then for me to say what I'm about to say is that you're not progressing if you're not seeing some type of performance improvement, at least over some type of time, in some of your lifts in some way, because those seem like they're in conflict, but they're not. It's that the act of seeing the maximum you can do on a specific lift is really just not, I wouldn't say it's completely useless to a bodybuilder, but it's probably not the best tool to assess your progress. It's certainly probably the least specific tool to the type of training you're doing. You know, you might actually see your 1RM go down as you go from an intensity block to a volume block that is more standard, quote unquote, bodybuilding, but you might be actually getting bigger. And I think that's another tough thing people struggle with. We like to think in direct relationships. We like to think linearly. We like to think additively as humans, right? If I say that strength is a product of hypertrophy, that bigger muscles are stronger, it's very difficult to then think that it's possible to get stronger while you're shrinking your muscles. Like, how is that possible? Well, it's because there's more than one contributor to strength, right? Like, if you think of it like a race car, you know, and if you're trying to get a race car on the track at the fastest time possible, you might actually be able to reduce the engine size, but also reduce the weight of the overall car, like switching from metal to carbon fiber parts. And you've made the engine smaller, but you might complete the race time faster, even though your horsepower's down. I'm sure someone who knows something about cars thinks I'm an idiot or just embarrassing and hilarious, but I think it probably makes sense if you think about it. There's a lot of things that contribute to how fast did that race car get around the track. You know, maybe the handling is poor or it can't make tight turns. And if you reduce the overall weight, but actually reduce its raw power, and it can make those turns tighter, it's more efficient. And then the net result is it being faster. So it's not just any one of those singular parts of the race car that make it a good racer. And flat out speed, you know, from point A to point B isn't the same as a course of a lot of turns. And I think if we understand that muscle size is one of the many components to your ability to express maximum force output through a skilled movement, then it all starts to make a lot more sense.
Boom shakalaka. Berto, what do you and your beard think about that? I saw you twisting it.
What he said, it's just a skill that we're specifically not too good at. But I think like bodybuilders like intuitively just know this, because like every once in a while, like you'll see, you know, a good pair of hardworking bros, like they've been putting in the work, they've been like hitting some PRs, and then every once in a while they're like, hey, you know, like I'm gonna max out. So as much as like they talk about like I'm not a powerlifter and this and that, it's like they kind of know. And when it's like enough time that it's like, you know, a new 1RM is probably not even a risk. I'm gonna go ahead and, you know, like go for that 4-plate bench I've been looking for. Mm-hmm. So you know, like you spend enough time in the lab, it's just you see it enough. And I think what Eric, to touch upon what Eric said about it not being specific to what we do, it's just, I guess, too much of it is risque. And I've been caught up in, you know, as a younger bodybuilder, when you hit a new 1RM and you're like, damn, that was cool. Like I feel like my training's been really coming together. And then you start doing it like every week, every other week. And then you kind of start to stall because the stimulus that you were partaking in to make that happen, well, you're kind of getting away from that. So I think like bodybuilders, like they hear 1RM and they think, no, not me, even though they still enjoy them, just much less frequently than like our cousin powerlifters. But most of them know this. And I think even everyone who was kind of giving us a little bit of grief on that post, like they I suspect they kind of knew that too. You know, it's just, it's hard to get everything like on a, you know, freaking square with a quote, but I think.
Yeah, what's funny too in that post, the particular one we're talking about, which is good. Like, first off, side note, we appreciate your comments on the gram because it made this episode. But it was funny because people, like Jeff says, like 1RM didn't do anything for my physique or something like that, or doesn't necessarily help my physique. And then people would immediately be like defending it. And then I would come in for a comment and be like, hey, but also what if your 5x5 got stronger? And they'd be like, oh yeah, well that too. It's like you said, they know it. It's just we're so quick to defend what makes us feel good. Like, we're not trying to say that you shouldn't ever do it, that it's not a good time, that it's completely useless. Like there is a difference, and I'm glad that it sparked that conversation. But like you said, Bert, it's like people get it. They just not even need reminders. It's just like we're so like knee jerk, I guess.
I think a lot of people who made comments it's not that they disagree with us. It's that they don't want other people to misunderstand or read between the lines in the incorrect way. I think they want to do the same thing we're doing. A lot of the comments I saw were like, yeah, but strength is important, you know? And yeah, totally. Because we don't want someone to come in there who has a bias already of, hey, it's all about feeling the pump. It's all about getting sore next time. It's all about sweating, getting a lot of volume, grime, and grit. And if they come into it with an anti-strength bias, they read that, they go, I knew it. Jeff already told me what I need to hear. I'm just going to go back to training the way I was. And then they spin their wheels. So I think, beating the logbook isn't the same thing as a percentage 1RM.
Ooh, that's a good quote.
Isn't the same thing as a 1RM. Yeah, beating the logbook isn't the same thing as a 1RM. That's an important distinction. So that said, I do think there is some people who know exactly what Jeff means and who know everything we're saying, who still think a 1RM has value from a programming perspective. And so, like, if we went back to 2009, 10, or 11, I would be like, yeah, but if your 1RM goes up, it means you're bigger. And I would probably take too not of a nuanced view. The next stage I got to where I would have struggled with Jeff's quote was when I didn't know how to program in other ways besides using percentage 1RMs, right? So there was a time like the jokingly named Helms Co programs that I made in 2013 or whatever. I made all these series of programs. They were all based on an estimated or actual 1RM and then percentages. And this was before, I did my PhD on RPE and found other ways to program, and we thought about that. So I think there's a lot of people who really enjoy programming with percentages, and they'd be like, well, of course a 1RM isn't important, but if I want to give you sets of 10 with 75%, 75% of what, So I don't know. Berto, how do you feel about that? Was there a time in your coaching where even though you didn't necessarily care what the 1RM was, you felt you needed it as a tool?
I think that we were kind of on the same page for a while with, it's almost embarrassing, but yeah, I think I viewed it from a perspective that if I could just force heavy singles to go up, that's another pathway to growth almost. And it probably, it would help, but in an indirect way, because it's like now I'm probably much more, technically sound at that lift. So now when I do all the other rep ranges, if you can get your stuff together for a good single, sets of 4 or 5 and 6, you're going to have an easier time with those. So, but yeah, no, same as you. And, but again, it conflicted with what I would see in the gym. I knew that when I got too greedy and I would go in there and I'm like, all right, today's the day I get 315 on that bench. Today's the day it's going to happen. And, eventually it went from hey, I was progressing in a pretty predictable way to now I'm kind of stalling because every week I'm getting urged by my training partners to hey, let's go for it. So, that again, you hang around long enough. I think it's amazing what some of the really experienced, really about that bottom line bros kind of understand. And I think the whole science side of things, more often than not, what ends up happening is you guys were kind of right about that thing that you guys have been seeing for years. We talked about the muscle memory thing. So yeah, it kind of conflicted with what I saw, but I legitimately saw it as another pathway to I guess via some elbow grease, get myself some new growth.
I think another fallacy that Helms Co-ish stuff created, especially for me, because that was still something I liked using when I started coaching with 3D in 2015 too, is putting not so much 1RM, but the emphasis was on that testing week. So we would have to, not real life, but in my head and my athletes, it would be we have to wait and they might be in the middle, week 4, and it's an 8-week block, and they'd be I don't know if I'm going, then I'm oh, wait till week 8, we'll find out how we're doing, or wait till, and it's the misconception that every workout could be, maybe not every workout sometimes, but looking back on the sum of each week could have been indicative of how we're actually doing, but it was so much emphasis on this one testing day at the end of the 8 weeks when that could have just been a bad day. Or we could have spent the whole week increasing 1% on like 5 different lifts, but it didn't matter because testing day wasn't so great or something like that.
This is stuff we've figured out with nutrition, because it is like the game changer during prep. Like like you said, Berto, the bottom line, like if we started tracking average body weight over 7 days and then 2 weeks and then 3 weeks and then looking at pictures more as they get close. Because bottom line, if our clients are not shredded when they get on stage, something went wrong, right? When it comes down to it in a contest prep coach's purview. And of course, there's nuance to that, like first-time competitor, different divisions, young competitor, relationship with food, coming from like big transformation to when you actually used to be with obesity and now you're doing your prep for the first time. Maybe getting shredded wasn't the goal, but just making a huge improvement. But whatever. But in general, we've figured out over the years, like, I got to see some scale weight dropping or they're not going to be popping at the end, right? Yeah. And I think we don't have that same awareness or understanding with training because like so much of just, if you're doing sets, it's hard, you're getting failure and you're doing enough exercises, you're going to be fine. You're going to maintain enough muscle mass. So we're looking at an extra like 5 or 10% by having these complex programming strategies, where in powerlifting it's the whole thing. So the old adage, if you're not assessing, you're just guessing, is true. But if you're assessing the wrong thing, that assessment is actually not helping you. It can be hindering you. Like Andrea, what you pointed out is basically by identifying something that we think is important, but not fully getting the context of the big picture, now we've created a new problem. Now I'm going to write you an 8-week block. Don't touch it. Don't mess with it. Do it perfect. Because all I know is after 8 weeks, I have a spreadsheet that calculates the percentage change on the big 6 in this spreadsheet. And if overhead press went up, but nothing else did, I give you more volume on overhead press. But I'm incapable of doing anything until 8 weeks goes on. And should we be relying on week 8's, AMRAP testing after a deload, because deloads fix everything. Like even the fact that you didn't get enough sleep or eat enough or you got stuck in traffic. Of course not, right? Yeah. Now we understand that, like, for example, okay, well then what's the equivalent of looking at a 3-week average of your body weight for training? And this is where some of the more reactive, auto-regulatory, bottom-up emergent strategies come from. Like I write 4-week blocks now or 3-week blocks now with deloads when I think they need to be there. And I incorporate things like a triple or a double or 4s or 5s at anywhere between a 6 to a 10 RPE. And then I'm just seeing, like, are your loads trending up over time? And that's a very different proposition to we need to end every block with a mock meet. Mm-hmm. What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.
Right now with your 4-week blocks or whatever, when you say trending over time, you don't mean like your big 3 went up. Like, what are things that you look at when you say trending over time in a 4-week block, say?
Great question. Yeah. So for example, if I've got a bodybuilder, I want to, so sometimes what I'll do is I'll set up a top set with back off sets, right? So I'll ask them, all right, today you're going to do a triple on bench that falls between a 7 to a 9 RPE. And we're going to do that next week and the week after as well. And then we'll do back off sets. So if over the course of 2 3-week blocks, that triple isn't trending upwards, that's probably not a good sign. That tells me we're not doing enough of something or we're doing too much of something. Or you're not doing something outside of the gym or you're doing too much of something outside of the gym that's impacting it. It basically is the alert for me to put my thinking cap on and to communicate with you. So that's very different than a fire and forget or fire and pray plan where I give you 8 weeks and hope everything comes together on, week 7, day 5. So it gives me, I don't have to wait 2 months before I make a change and then hope that change was correct instead of me just chasing a ghost, like you didn't get good sleep the night before, or I just don't have the right percentage 1RM repetition relationship with you and you're training too close or too far from failure for the whole 7 weeks prior. And those are all, unfortunately, mistakes I've made, not specific. Those are specific examples. So, yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Bert? Like when you give a block of training, what are you looking at with your bodybuilders as progress, yes or no, or enough progress, yes or no, or?
So with my bodybuilders, if they allow me to, like I will, they're doing movements where this is, I think, okay to do. I'll have them do like a top single because like they help out so much in regards to like waking you up for like the actual stimulus, and we get to, like Eric mentioned, we get to gauge what loads we're going to use based off that. So I'll look at the single a lot, obviously, because everything else is going to kind of come after that. So I'll look at the single, and then I'll look at like the trends with the back off work, because you can see improvement there too. But what came to mind, actually, I have I guess you call him kind of a hybrid guy. Like he likes to look good, but he's also like into the art of the barbell too. He's Timothy in Taiwan. He's going to get a kick out of hearing his name on here. But with him, it's been, I think of late, it's just been like a lot, like we used to get some singles here and there that were kind of flickery. Like it would show up every once in a while, and then like we wouldn't see that again for like, 4 or 5 weeks. And now I'm like, dude, like that thing is showing up like almost all the time. So it's kind of like weigh-ins, say it's trending down, and you're like, man, I want to see something under 170. And it's like, wow, like now after my refeed days, I'm under 170. So I think it puts an athlete in a way more relaxed state of mind, because most of the people we get, they're really hard workers, and that's the first thing they blame. So they're kind of on edge when like the program is written out the way we used to a few years back, and now it's more so they're more accepting of like, okay, we're just here to kind of weigh in, and we'll take down the data, and then we need a few of these before we can really decide like what's going on. So yeah, very very similar to Eric in that sense. There was I think a point where like natural bodybuilding, we were perhaps a little bit too infatuated with like what powerlifters were doing, and I think a lot of folks has got great results from going like to that side because they had never objectively looked at their training. Before it was more so about feel and puking and things like that. So it worked, but then it kind of stops working at a certain point, and I guess we're both like in a way take almost blame for that, but at the same time we've also, I think, over time along with a lot of other good resources out there, kind of corrected that, and I think we're in a really good place as a community, because again, like a bunch of people who were contributing to that square, they were just kind of elaborating for the sake of maybe the newer audience. So yeah. No, we've come full circle with that stuff. I do think there's a population in there where like, and this is one of my like beefs with like my own kind, who kind of, because I think some people might have that group of people might have looked at Jeff's quote and thought like, like, hell yeah, brother, you're one of us. Because there's still people out there who look at like 1RMs and powerlifting as like it's like an ego thing, Mm-hmm. But it's like, to me, it's like when I look at a sensational lift, it's I see it very similar to like, I don't know, Usain Bolt running like the 100 meters, and it's like no one's telling him, hey bro, slow down. That's a lot of ego you got going there, brother, right? So yeah, I do think there's a group of bodybuilders that still, I guess, see strength as that. Whereas like the thing to me about strength, like when I look at guys about my body weight who are powerlifting, it's just I can't get over their technique and all the things that you have to do right to have a lift go that well. And again, I think it's just a wonderful teaching tool, because when my 1RM does increase, it's like with loads somewhere in the, I don't know, like 75-85% range, it just feels more like automatic, for sure. So yeah, we're not one of those bodybuilders, or Jeff isn't anyways.
There's some important things in what you said that I think are worth diving into a little deeper. And it comes down to, philosophically, a system can have parts that are unnecessary, but still be a successful endeavor for you to pursue if the things it has were things you were missing. I wrote about this in my articles back in 2017, what have bodybuilders learned from powerlifting and vice versa, a couple part series. And that there are positives and negatives from adopting a overly powerlifting centric approach to bodybuilding. But certain people, like you said, those bros and sisters you're talking about, who are like really by feel, very much like the art of bodybuilding, and I know what's best for me, and really, really in tune with themselves, and they have all these qualitative things that tell them if they're doing a good job. When they're honest, when they're not overly emotionally triggered, or when they're not challenged, or when they're in a good headspace, that's a huge benefit, right? That allows them to really get a very customized, individualized approach. But if they are frustrated, injured, not wanting to accept the current reality, challenged by others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it becomes almost like this defense. Like, I know best. I'm not open-minded to that. And I think for someone like that who has been going completely qualitative, and they go to and they're plateaued, like they're not progressing, and they don't know what to do about it, and they go to a powerlifting approach because everything's quantified, there's objective markers, and you can tell if you're getting stronger or not, they probably will make really good progress. But for someone who's already quite analytical and is tracking volume, is tracking their training progress, has a logical approach to things, and then goes to powerlifting, it might just give you achy hips, like, because it's not powerlifting that's the solution. It's, did you have an objective gauge of progress to assess, is your current program eliciting overload? Or does it just feel hard, right? So I think that's a really important distinction, and that's probably the biggest thing to borrow from powerlifting is, having something to track, beating the logbook. But like, there's plenty of bodybuilding systems that already have that. Like DC, for example, the whole tenet is beat the logbook. Find a way to create overload, and I think that's a really important aspect. And I know I've been saying that the whole thing. There's a big difference between progress and your current strength, but it's difficult to really understand that. Like, I could have said that out loud, but I still did dumb shit like you did Berto, back in, like, say 2009, 10, 11. I would say, like, I was like, okay, so bigger muscles or stronger muscles, and the way that I'm assessing strength is 1RM, then anything that increases my 1RM means I got bigger, which is, hopefully you can see the logical fallacy in the jump I made, right? And what it resulted in was I had this big spike in 1RM from like 2009 to 2010, and then I basically plateaued in 2011. Because my overall volume went down, my specificity went up, I started training like a power lifter, and I got better at the movements, but didn't gain any muscle mass. So I took one little, bar that contributed to my total strength, maxed it out, and then left the others to be neglected, got that bump, and then a plateau. And that's actually what the research on very, very highly specific 1RM based training shows. We have some very, very limited data. There's a study that came out by Androlakis Korakakis about the 3-2-1 approach. He's a Greek powerlifter. Cool last name. We call him Pac. That's what he goes by. And he had a group that was doing a periodized plan of powerlifters, and then a group that just did 3-2-1, meaning they worked up to 3 singles on bench, 2 singles on squat, 1 single on deadlift. Literally had 1/10 of the tonnage of the other group. And both groups had very similar gains initially for like the first 4 to 7 weeks. The group of powerlifters doing the 3-2-1 got stronger, but then on meet day, they didn't perform as well as the periodized group. So that's kind of squares. Like, if you go through a specialization cycle, you'll get really good at that thing. And the cost to benefit ratio will benefit you for strength. In the case study by Zerdos on 37 days of daily 1RM training in 2 powerlifters and 1 Olympic lifter, there was actually some of the ultrasound measurements on some individuals that showed a small reduction in muscle thickness in the quads on ultrasound, but all of them got stronger. It just goes to show you that all those things Berto observes in a high-level powerlifter, that skill, that focus, the biomechanical advantage, the perfect position, the exact emphasis on all the little pieces that go into a 1RM, that can all be going up and have a much larger effect acutely on your 1RM strength than necessarily how big your quads are. Shit, you learn how to low bar squat in 3 weeks, you might add 10% to your squat. Yeah. You know? So I think that's a really important thing to consider, is that bigger muscles do make 1RMs higher, but that does not mean that anything that increases a 1RM makes your muscles bigger.
True. Also, going back to what Berto said, and you mentioned it too, Eric, I guess as far as like, okay, if we know all these things and then so what do we do? Right. And so the 2 things I wanted to go with off of what y'all mentioned, which being top singles. When I was doing like CrossFit Olympic lifting, we called them heavy singles. Some people call them a top set, whatever it is. So if we could go into listeners, what that is, why we use that usually for compounds, but we can talk about why. And then and other ways to measure progress for like those heavies. And then maybe also get into okay, other than the big 3 or whatever, my main 4, whatever you decide, how else do I monitor it over time? So like, again, if y'all feel like we've spent a good half hour covering that, could we spend the next 20, 30 talking about what to do instead, or why not? Other ways that we can assess our strength for servicing a physique athlete. Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, I think if someone listened to this point, they get that strength is important, progress is important, but a 1RM is just one way of measuring strength. Yeah. So but what do I do? Okay, so if I'm not having my athletes do 1RMs, how do I program? I know coaches will be asking that, and then I know maybe bodybuilders who have actually been doing 1RMs, and that's how they assess their progress, are now like, well, I feel like you just took away a tool, but I don't know what to do in its place. Or maybe you're someone who has not been tracking progress, and we've convinced you it's important, but now you want to know how to do it. So I think there's a number of ways to do it. And some of them people will not want to do, and others. So I think I can give someone like maybe 3 or 4 options of how they could not test 1RMs, but still measure progress for sure.
Shoot, I think we could give them like 20, to be honest, between all of us.
Just 4.
Just 4. Okay. No, but could or should we distinguish between, because again, y'all mentioned top sets. I know y'all don't mean that for a bicep curl. So,
yep.
Do we want to distinguish like, okay, this is how we look at like global strength versus like specific isolation movements? Maybe the first question is, do we separate those in the way we look at a bodybuilding program? Compounds
I think it's
versus
helpful
accessories. Too. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's helpful too.
So can we go with the compound/heavies for now?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think because that's another one. Even if someone did think and wanted to keep using 1RMs, I guarantee you if you ask them like, well, do you do 1RM testing on a bicep curl? And they go, of course not. It's like, okay, well, but all of them, it's important, right? So for a bodybuilder at least. So I would say, one of the easy ways of doing this is you kind of break the movements into what's important for a bodybuilder. And we've talked about this many times, our kind of stereotypical big 6, right? It's a squat pattern, a hinge pattern, and then a vertical and horizontal push and pull each. And with a very liberal definition of what those could all be. You know, that could be a hip thrust on your hip hinge, and that could be a barbell lunge on your squat pattern. It could even be a leg press and an RDL or whatever you want. So I think if you use those as your main metrics, and that's what you're actually testing, and it's helpful, I think, to use barbells on these or machines that allow a lot of loading, because then you can make small incremental changes. That's the only reason, though. So you don't have to do a 1RM. One option is the RPE stuff. So we talked about top singles or triples or even 5s. And if you do them close to but not to failure, and you can guess and you can estimate how many repetitions from failure you are, then that can give you an estimated 1RM. And you could use the estimated 1RM. Or you could just simply use the load at those reps. Like if you did 100 kilos for 5 and then you did back off sets of 12 on bench, is your 5 rep top set going up? You know, that's a very easy way to do it. And you can do that with a bunch of compounds. You can have that initial set be lower rep, back off work, or you can just have those low rep sets anywhere sprinkled throughout your week. Like Berto was saying, just having those singles on squats sprinkled in. If you don't want to do singles, triples, 4s, 5s, all good. You can get an estimated 1RM, like I said, or you could just simply have a comparison between the same rep range.
Okay, so when you say 1RM, 3RM, or like estimated, or all these things, you're talking about a heavy measure. You said an RPE. I guess I think what would be cool to maybe break down is when we say heavy single or a top 5 or whatever, we are not talking about failure, and why not?
Yeah.
And should a bodybuilder ever go to failure when testing?
That is an option. I'm going to put that out there. And by failure, I mean doing the last rep you could out of a set, going to a 10 RPE, if you will, or a 0 repetitions in reserve. This is something, so some people do have an aversion to RPE. They're not good at it, they don't like it, or they have a tough time holding back. And I'm going to say this just because I don't want to just tell those people you don't have an option. You can set up a bodybuilding program training to failure. There's been many highly successful natural and enhanced guys who do it, and gals. But you probably want to, if you're going to push the intensity, you probably want to drop back a little bit something else. Like some of the really popular approaches right now, like I think of Jordan Peters and a few others, and like the Dorian Yates approach, where they do objectively track progress over time. They basically like 2 sets that you do take all the way to failure. Make sure you have a spotter, and it's even with a compound movement. I'm not a huge fan of that approach, but what they do is they limit volume. So the overall volume comes down because you push intensity. And that is a totally valid way of going. And it also makes tracking progress really easy. You don't have to guess, was that a 9 or an 8? So could I have done 2 reps or could I have done 3? All that. So if you're willing to push compounds to failure, if you got a spotter, and if you're okay with dialing volume back a little bit and or maybe frequency, that's totally fine. And you can train primarily, or at least on your last set on accessories, on all your accessories, and maybe for 1 set on your compounds. If you want to go to a 10 RPE, it's really simple. Is your load going up? Can you do more reps? That's really easy. However, what I would probably recommend in most cases is doing a little more volume and a little higher frequency than is conducive to going to failure on everything, especially big compound movements that generate a lot of global fatigue. Like if I told you to do, a total of 8 sets of squats per week in the 6 to 12 rep range, and you did all 8 sets to a 10 RPE, you're going to have a really tough time doing much else, So especially as you get stronger. So that may not be the best way to go. And that's why I recommend, all right, you've got these sets of squats. They're between 6 to 10 RP, depending on the day. And we've got only 1 or 2 tester sets per week that's close enough to failure in a relatively low rep range so that it removes a lot of the noise. That's basically what we want to do. If we want to get an objective quantification of progress, we need to make sure that it's not limited by something that is unrelated to what would probably be muscle size, right? So a hard set of 5 when you're recovered, that's near failure but not to it, is both safe. You can gauge accurately how far from failure you might be, and you could derive an estimated 1RM if you wanted to, or you could just see, could I, add more load to that next time and have it be similarly difficult.
Yeah. In the simplest of ways. So let's say I'm self-coached. I found a bodybuilding program online that I just, maybe it's one of the free ones from the pyramids. I don't know. Check out our story highlights on Instagram. Shameless plug. And it's okay, here are your lifts. You're doing 3x5 of this, 4x10 of this, blah, blah, blah. Could I just follow that program week after week and then every 4 weeks do a top single before the normal workout?
You certainly could. Okay. I think,
or something like that. That's that simple, because if I was just starting out, that I could gauge.
If you're just starting out, though, at certain training ages, you don't need to test strength. you get stronger at a fast enough pace that even being submaximal, you can see that. Like I remember the good old days. And that's kind of like, speaking of the pyramids, that's how we build our intermediate and our novice program. The novice program, you basically just think of that same workout to the next workout. Did you do more loads or more or more reps, depending on the exercise? That's it, and try not to hit failure, but that's it. And then in the intermediate program, there's that linear progression such that you go like 6, 5, 4. Linear in the sense that volume goes down, load goes up. And then if you can no longer do that without hitting failure a lot, that's when you might want to consider changing something or trying a more advanced approach. So I think for the intermediate or novice, probably not even necessary to do those tester singles.
Like it's built in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like if you're training hard, you'll notice for the same effort level, for the same reps on the same exercise, you can do more load, and it's just done.
It's just those people, if they wanted to have a heavy single or a 1RM, that might be a good place to do it. Would probably be at the beginning of a session before your back offs, right? Regardless of the program. Okay.
Absolutely. I do think it gets a little more complicated when progress is coming slower. You're trying new things to make it go, and you don't know what's an appropriate rate of progress. And then let's say you're used to training to failure, but now training to failure beats you up too much to tell if you're progressing, and you're not familiar with RPE. I think that's where a lot of our clients find themselves. So Alberto, what's your most common programming strategies for your competitors who by definition are pretty advanced for gauging if they're progressing or not?
I almost force, we're going to learn to do the RPE thing because I think it's that valuable, and it changed my training life. I went from, I couldn't fathom. I remember reading a muscular development article back in 1999, and all it was in bold letters, failure versus non-failure. I'm like, why would you even not train to failure? So I did that for a good chunk of years. And then I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to trust this. I'm going to leave 2 reps in the tank, because 2 reps was, I think, pretty easy for me to gauge on most things. And whoa, I was so beat up from training to failure for years that just, it was like magic. It was like a, beginning intermediate all over again. So I like to use, even if it's going to suck for a little bit, it's like, this is going to be so valuable. And at some point, you will thank me for teaching you this. It's like the beginner, macronator who's I'm drinking oil here to make my fat because I messed up somewhere along the day, but it's worth it at the end, a lot of those things that start that way are. So I go with that, and honestly, I just pick trends that I think are appropriate given what I know about the athlete. So someone like myself, it's more so, man, it's messy. My top singles on a squat can range from as low as, and they're usually at about an 8, from 425 all the way to right under 500, through the majority of a training block. And yeah, it sucks for me too, because sometimes I'm like, okay, today I'm 425 strong. That's what we're working with, but that's just the reality of it. So yeah, I almost fly by the seat of my pants and just look at the person and decide what is appropriate, and make sure they're aware of that too, because sometimes it's a lot can change in 6 months, from where we started to, and Bert was magic to now all of a sudden they're like, Bert, we're not progressing the way we did when we first started. Is there something wrong? And it's no, this is because things are going really well. It's just, you've changed as a lifter. So yeah.
Okay. So for these heavies, we've got, built into the program, your main lifts will go up over time, every workout, every week, maybe 2, maybe even every month as an intermediate, something like that. You hit a new something. We have top sets, whether that's singles, triples, 5s, or something like that. You want to give us the other 2 of your 4, Eric, for ways that we could assess?
Yeah. So essentially there's the ones that I like Berto prefer, where we actually teach RIR RPE. So someone gets comfortable enough gauging when they're 1 to 2 reps from failure, because it just opens up a lot of opportunities. That allows you to keep your finger on the pulse the whole time. You can have a 4-week block, and on week 1, day 2, you can have a triple at a 8 RPE. And okay, we roughly know what your 5 RM is right now, and then we can see what does that 5 RM do. And so long as it's trending upwards, it'll dip and peak. As long as it's trending upwards, it gives us that. If we don't want to go the RPE route, option 2 is, you train to failure. That's fine, but you got to curtail frequency and or volume. Probably volume more than anything else. And then you just see, did you get stronger, right? And that's 100% fine. So those are the 2 options we've kind of already discussed. Then there is also not a 1RM, but an AMRAP that you can do at the end of blocks. And we discussed the weaknesses of that, is that it puts a whole lot of pressure on that one day. So what you can do is, instead of training to failure all the time, you can have semi-regular AMRAPs. You can have an AMRAP built into a movement once a week, like if you think about the way, 5-3-1 was built, for example, you would do at the end of each 3-week block, you go 5, 3, 1, and then it'd be 5 plus 3 plus 1 plus, right? So you have testing, it's in there. And then you have enough time to gauge whether it goes up or not. So you can have AMRAPs they can be quite high in reps. I think that anything 10 reps or lower, so long as you're not trying to derive a 1RM from that, that's fine. The other options are, you can have an open-ended rep series. So for example, you can just try to add reps. Like we talked about double progression before on the podcast. Like you can just have a load that you're trying to add reps on. So you can start with what might be like, let's say your 6 rep max, and then each week, instead of trying to go up and load, you're just trying to add more reps over time. That's totally valid as well. Again, the ability to gauge RPE is helpful here, because I'd rather have you adding reps but not going to failure than going to failure by adding reps, because then you start to, again, have to curtail volume or frequency. So I think if you decide that RPE is not for you, you got far more limited options. Basically, you train to failure on everything. That's how you see progress. You pick some movements that you do sets to failure on AMRAPs or 3 RMs or 5 RMs or whatever. Or that's it. Or you test at the end, or multiple. It's like, when do you test, basically, or what movements and how often do you train to failure? And that's what you gauge progress on. But if you've got the ability to gauge even 0, 1, 2 reps from failure, like Berto was saying, then you can see things progress while not being forced into the corner of needing to limit something else, because you're pushing yourself to your limit. Yeah. So those are kind of the ones that I think are options.
I think what helped, when I was coached by Bert back in the day, I had a problem with RPE because ego. Like I heard RPE, but if I didn't beat last week, I was gonna beat last week until I stopped beating last week, like we talked about. But a few sports later, something that really helped me when Olympic lifting, there was a fly on my nose out of nowhere, a gnat maybe, was like percentages and then heavies in video. So like the reps away, I get, it took me a long time to get, but for whatever reason, somewhere in my brain, it was much easier for me to say like 80% effort, 90% effort. That felt whatever. I know that's just a language thing, but I'm just trying to give people options. Heavy single was just like, it took me Olympic lifting to get, and then I could carry it over into my strength lifts, was like something heavy just meant like, there's no way you'll miss this, but it was pretty hard. Like just that verbiage was like, okay, got that. So I guess if RPE sounds and like reps away, like with 2 versus 3 or whatever sounds hard, there's other ways to construct that in your brain.
Yep. One of the ones I will do with myself, if I'm going to do singles, doubles, or triples to start a program off that circumvents my ego, is I put myself in a place of questioning my own safety. So like I'll only put it on the bar if it's meant to be a sub-maximal single, double, or triple. If I don't need to ask Barb for a spot. If I find myself asking Barb for a spot, there's a possibility this won't be an 8 RPE, right? Yeah. So I'm thinking I'm into 9, maybe even 10 or 10.5 territory where I'd miss, right? So I need to take weight off the bar, Yeah. And I think it's a tough thing, especially like, Berto mentioned the number 315. like, God damn it, that means nothing. Like 315 pounds. It just happens to be we got these 45-pound plates and bars, and that's 3 plates, you know? But it's really, as much as we joke about it, like, dude, benching 315 is a huge milestone for most men who are not lightweights, you know? And to be honest, lightweights want to bench it too. It's just that, you know, they put it on a pedestal because they've seen someone else do it. That's like being a strong dude in your gym if you're like over 5'6", you know?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where that can easily cloud your judgment and lead you down bad paths. I'm thinking of a specific old workout partner that Berto had, who I got to train sometimes with. We got so caught up in the numbers that basically all of his sessions started with him trying to max out on something.
Oh my God.
And he never got to do any volume. And I remember him missing a 500-pound deadlift and a 315 bench at like every powerlifting meet we did together.
Goodness.
Because his style of training was just
Why are you laughing,
hitting
Bert?
those
That's your
numbers.
friend. Oh, really?
Yeah,
It was contagious, though. I'll tell you that. I was so disciplined, I think, prior to that. I was, you know, but you see your friends do that, you start jumping into that too. And it never got that bad, but yeah, my boy got pretty bad with it for a minute there.
Yeah. And I think it's knowing that this relationship's a little different than we thought, and there's so many ways to test. It gives you more options to succeed. Also, if you can't do a movement anymore, if you're hurt, or you can only train at high rep ranges, you're like, hold on. If I can, like, yeah, I'm saying that instead of doing like a barbell row or deadlifts, you can add reps to hip thrusts and cable rows instead of testing something. Like, yeah, if you can go to 14 to 15 reps with the same load on those two movements, that counts. So it's really more almost that if you were seeing progression happen, you know that overload happened. That's really the way to view progressive overload, not trying to force something, because if I don't get this up, then I didn't progress. So therefore RP goes out the window. I think that's where like Andrea had that struggle, I had that struggle, Berto had that struggle. It's when you're trying to force progression when it's not there. Either you don't have sufficient volume, or you have unrealistic expectations, or you're not eating enough, or whatever. If you are not able to progress in any of the ways we talked about, that should be a call to action for you to figure out, do I have unrealistic expectations, or does something need to change?
Right. Sweet. What about my non-6 main movements?
Absolutely. I think it's if your chin-ups and your rows are going up, that's probably enough. Like, another way to look at this is, I remember when I first started training, like really early on, I want to say I was curling 20-pound dumbbells for moderate rep ranges. And at my highest, when I don't have elbow tendonitis and I'm crushing it, I have curled like 50s with reasonably good form. So that's a huge absolute change. That's literally a more than 100% increase in strength. But it's only 30 pounds. Like, there's only 20s, 25s, 30s, 35s, 40s, and 45s between that. Like, how do you even parse that out? There is no way. So the way to do it is focus more on reps. But even that starts to get pretty finite compared to being able to add to a number that could be 500 or 300, and you can make 5-pound increment jumps and do reps. So I think for the isolation movements, you have to look at like multiple months to gauge whether or not you're improving. Machines are helpful because sometimes you're dealing with a larger absolute load, like a leg extension. That's an isolation movement, but you can get the plates down a whole lot. So I think looking at reps first and really just not worrying about it. Like, if your curl hasn't gone up, but you're chinning more, your lat pull downing more, you're rowing more, you're probably doing sufficient stimulus for your biceps to grow. They're contributing to that. It's just that you just don't have the increments. You don't have the grams listed on those dumbbells to know if you've actually gone up in load, and they probably weigh different every place you go to anyway. So don't stress it too much. Just do the work.
Word. What about you, Bert? Anything else to add to that? You're the king of the pump.
King of the pump? I didn't know I was a king of the pump.
Yeah, you didn't know? Because your veins and stuff. That's your crown.
Oh, yeah. That's
a crown of veins.
Go by that. Actually, that would be progress if there's new veins showing up. I like, I stole this one from Brian Miner, 12 to 20. And it's like, okay, this is your weight on the pull down. Like, it's going to be your weight on the pull down for a while. Just deal with it. Go in there, add reps. You're going to be here for a while, man. Like, even if you're like using like shitty form and being greedy with it, you're going to be here for a while. So when I give people that, I think I see form improvements, which even with ISOs, like it's it's still a part of the equation. And yeah, they're just more patient. They're nibbling reps, so you're microloading that way. And sometimes they learn RPE this way, because it's like, let's say they're just stuck. It's like, man, coach, I get 20, and then it just dive bombs after that with the sets afterwards. I'm like, hey, how about this? Let's try to like stop at 18, like with that first set, and let's see what happens. And it's like a huge aha moment. Like, oh crap, this, like, kind of pacing yourself, like the way you would say on a long run, you can kind of apply it to something like weightlifting, so or bodybuilding. So I love, just giving people broad rep ranges from which to progress with, and I see less, because I can't supervise a lot of my people, right? I'm not there with them, so it's been very helpful to do it that way.
Yeah. So like say they have 4 sets of 12 to 20, like if they are just pushing closer to 80 every couple weeks. So if it's like 12 times 4, which is 48, which I'm not going to do any more math because I'll embarrass myself. But like, and then it's like 14 for all the sets, 16 for all the sets. And then when they get to the 4x20 or whatever, or closer to it, then you go up in weight. Is that what you're saying? In short?
Yeah.
Groovy.
Yep.
And one thing to point out, just to add to that, it'll also tell you if that's not enough sets to drive the ability to add more reps. That's the one weakness of double progression. It's like, all right, here's 3 sets of 12 to 15, or let's say 8 to 20 to keep the thing. You get 3 sets. Once you get to 3x20, we can go to the next load. It may not be enough work on that movement to give enough stimulus for you to ever get to 3x20. And how do you know that? Well, you don't get there. Like, you get stuck around 3x15. And then the solution, instead of making your form get shitty or just hitting failure and banging your head against the wall week on, is go, well, let a 4 set, So it's not only the progress itself, but it also is the diagnosis as to whether you need to change things, which is nice. And it's a better way it's a more dynamic way of using progression and progressive overload. Is, all right, here's a fixed amount of work we can do, progress in this fixed amount. And if we just can't seem to progress, even though we do everything else right, and you're decently recovered, it's probably not enough. We need to change the fixed amount. So if 3x8 to 20 ain't getting you to 3x20, maybe 4x8 to 20 will, because that additional 4 set is enough to drive stimulus that you are getting bigger and stronger, increasing your muscular endurance and ability to buffer, and you can get those 4 sets of 20. So it's both its own bottleneck and its own solution.
Sick. Before, I know for this particular episode, unfortunately, we have a hard stop in like 5 minutes-ish. But I just want to leave the peeps with, okay, I have all these tools. I know, all right, I'm a bodybuilder, and the whole goal is to look different. A good way to gauge that is strength. It matters over time. All the things we talked about. But what if I'm getting stronger? And we kind of talked about this in like the compound section. But if I'm getting stronger over time, but it's been a year of me getting stronger and I don't look any different, what should I do? Because we're talking to physique athletes.
I think the only time, well, for one, just realize that your ability to gauge your own physique progress as a natural lifter is not good. I stepped on stage and I had an epiphany moment when I finally saw Brandon's pictures. You can. I remember sitting next to Berto and Barb and Brandon. I was like, "Holy shit, that's me!" Like, and like I couldn't believe it that I looked like that. That I finally looked like the bodybuilder I hoped I'd look like one day. But it took 9 years, from 2011 to 8 years, 2011 to 2019, to see that. And that's something that, you could see it in my physique just walking around in the off season, but it's such a small rate of progress for me to see that I may not be seeing it. So I really doubt. I think there's a finite amount of time that will pass where you can gain strength and not get bigger before eventually you just stop getting stronger. Because if you're not getting bigger at all, you're going to end up maxing out all those other bars that I talked about. And that happened to me. Like, I had a real hot streak when I was running like a West Side variant after I ran Max OT. And I remember Berto on the forum was like, dude, you're like Babe Ruth. You can just call it. Like you said, 3 weeks from now, I'm going to hit a 5-pound PR on deadlifts. And then I hit like a mid-range 500 deadlift, a high 400 squat, a low 300s bench. I was stuck until like 2 years ago. for years, and it was because I kept doing things within the confines of that volume. Powerlifting, changing, okay, I'll do different frequencies. I'll do accommodating resistance. All right, I'll do block pull. All right, I'll change exercises. I did everything except just accepting that I was at a point where I needed to do more. And then I started growing physically, and my 1RMs just went boop and just leveled up 10% across the board. And I hit a 495 squat, 550 deadlift, and a 360 bench. Like literally, I was just stuck on all of them.
Yeah.
So I think for the person who is experiencing those strength gains but's not seeing visual changes, high probability, if you're actually following a bodybuilding style program, that if your lateral raises are going up, your curls are going up, your rows are going up, your overhead press is going up, but you're not seeing progress in your physique, just wait longer and have more realistic expectations and accept that you're probably the worst person to gauge your progress. Ask somebody else. And it's tough if you're also gaining weight and putting on body fat. If the other scenario where you were like I was, you were doing like a powerlifting program and you're getting stronger on the power lifts, and you're not seeing any changes in your physique, it will probably peter out pretty soon. Because if your pecs, delts, and triceps aren't getting bigger, eventually you're going to see a plateau in your strength. So I would just say make sure you're actually following a bodybuilding program, if that's the case.
Okay. Berto, what you got?
I guess since we're talking about strength, I think it's kind of underappreciated with bodybuilders. But I think right now, during like if you're training at home, it's like your big aha moment. Like I remember, I'd have to be super careful about my progressions when I was like splitting time between home and the gym when I was a teen, and I'm like, I can't get too strong too quick, or it better be with good form, or I just need to keep pounding away at that 40-pound dumbbell with whatever movement because that's all I have. And we're kind of back there at once where I'm like, okay, be so much more practical to, I guess, use rep ranges that aren't always that aren't bodybuilder typical according to whatever stereotypes are out there. So yeah, strength it's a great measuring tool, and I miss it right now.
Truth.
Yeah.
Okay. Final words. Either of y'all. Both of y'all.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow. That was beautiful. Okay. Thanks, guys. See y'all next time.
Hey guys, this is Coach Alberto Nunez. Thanks so much for listening to our show today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I wanted to take a moment to remind you guys that we have a giant video library of educational materials at 3dmjvault.com. The vault is a place where we have organized our best information, paired it up with some of our favorite resources, and shared with all of you guys in one online database. We have courses on contest prep, hypertrophy, posing, fat loss, postseason recovery, and a whole lot more. Most of it is free. Some of it is for purchase to help support this podcast, and we continue adding pieces of updated content to it every couple of months that members always have unlimited access to. Once again, that's 3dmjvault.com, and we really hope you like it.